A racist officer humiliates and arrests a black waiter in front of everyone, but he has no idea who his victim really is. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. Michael Warren tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the imposing facade of Le Chateau, an upscale French restaurant in the heart of the city, loomed into view. The building exuded elegance, with its tall glass windows and intricate ironwork details that whispered exclusivity. It was a place where deals were made over $1,000 bottles of wine, and secrets lingered in the hushed ambiance like the faint scent of truffles. For Michael, however, this was no mere restaurant. It was the epicenter of a sprawling international smuggling operation, and his mission was clear: infiltrate, observe, and gather evidence to bring down one of the most elusive crime syndicates in the world. He took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His cover was airtight. As Mark Wilson, an ex-hotel worker looking for a stable job, he had the perfect backstory to blend in as part of the restaurant staff. His training had been extensive. He'd studied fine dining etiquette, memorized wine pairings, and learned the French phrases sprinkled into the restaurant's vernacular. Yet, as he stepped out of the car and approached the ornate double doors, a faint tension lingered in his chest. This wasn't his first undercover assignment, but it was certainly one of the most delicate. Inside, the air was cool and perfumed with the mingling scents of rich sauces and freshly baked bread. A hostess with a practiced smile greeted him, directing him to the manager's office. The manager, Victor Dupont, was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with a rigid posture and an aura of control. As he looked Michael over, there was a flicker of something, perhaps doubt or curiosity. Michael stood tall, his face a perfect mask of professionalism. "Mark Wilson," Victor finally said, his French accent lilting. "You've worked in hospitality before, yes?" "Yes, sir," Michael replied smoothly. "Mostly smaller establishments, but I'm eager to learn and contribute here." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Le Chateau is not a place for the faint of heart. We expect precision, discipline, and discretion. Can you handle that?" Michael nodded. "Absolutely." After a few more probing questions, Victor seemed satisfied. He handed Michael a neatly pressed uniform and directed him to the staff area. The first hurdle was cleared, but Michael knew the real challenges were yet to come. In the bustling staff quarters, he quickly assessed his new environment. The team was diverse: servers, chefs, and busboys of varying backgrounds. Most were too busy with their tasks to pay much attention to him, but a few spared him curious glances. Michael made a mental note of their faces, cataloging potential allies and adversaries. He introduced himself briefly, keeping his demeanor friendly yet reserved. By the end of the day, he had learned the restaurant's layout, memorized key procedures, and even identified a potential lead. Carlos Mendoza, the enigmatic businessman who owned multiple import-export companies, was a frequent guest. His reserved table in the back corner of the dining room was booked 3 times a week, always under different names. Michael's job was to monitor Mendoza and gather evidence of his involvement in smuggling operations, but he also needed to remain invisible. It wasn't long before Michael realized that blending in would be easier said than done. On his 3rd day, while meticulously polishing silverware during a quiet moment in the dining room, Michael felt the weight of a gaze on him. He looked up to find a tall, broad-shouldered man seated at a nearby table, his sharp blue eyes fixed on him. The man wore the uniform of a police officer, his badge glinting faintly in the dim light. It was James Harper. Harper didn't call him over immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, sipping his whiskey and surveying the room as though he owned it. The restaurant buzzed quietly around them, the soft clink of cutlery and murmured conversations filling the air, but Michael felt the oppressive scrutiny like a spotlight. Finally, Harper motioned for him. Michael straightened his posture, carefully approached the table, and greeted him with a professional smile. "Good evening, sir. How may I assist you?" Harper's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just a whiskey refill, Mark. But tell me, how'd a guy like you land a spot in a place like this?" The words were innocuous enough, but the tone carried a sharp edge. Michael's smile remained fixed as he poured the drink with practiced ease. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, sir." Harper murmured, taking a slow sip. "Grateful, sure." He didn't elaborate, but his gaze lingered, dissecting Michael as if searching for flaws or inconsistencies. As the days turned into weeks, Harper's presence became a regular feature of the restaurant. He never missed an opportunity to interact with Michael, always with that same subtle condescension. At first, it was minor. Overly critical comments about the service, pointed remarks about Michael's ability to fit in. But soon it escalated. Harper began to challenge him in front of colleagues, questioning his competence and making veiled comments that hinted at something deeper. "Ever feel like you're in the wrong place, Mark?" he said one evening, leaning across the table with a smirk. "Like you're playing a part that doesn't quite suit you?" Michael's patience was tested daily, but he couldn't afford to lose his temper. He endured the jabs and provocations with a calm professionalism that only seemed to irk Harper further. Yet, beneath the surface, Michael was watching and waiting. Harper's behavior was a problem, but it might also be an opportunity. The man was clearly arrogant and reckless, qualities that could be exploited. By the end of the month, Michael had settled into a precarious routine. He was making progress in his mission, piecing together bits of information about Mendoza and his associates, but the shadow of Harper loomed large. The man was more than just a bully. He was a wild card, and Michael knew it was only a matter of time before things came to a head. For now, all he could do was stay the course, balancing his cover with the growing tension in the room. As he closed up one evening, Michael lingered near the back entrance, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. The mission was dangerous, but it was also necessary. Mendoza was a threat that needed to be stopped, and Harper, no matter how much of a nuisance, was just another obstacle to overcome. Michael's resolve hardened. He had a job to do, and he wouldn't let anyone, especially a man like James Harper, stand in his way. The dining room buzzed with quiet conversations as Michael moved with practiced precision from table to table, balancing plates of escargot and steak au poivre. To the casual observer, he was just another waiter, blending seamlessly into the polished atmosphere of Le Chateau. But beneath his composed exterior, tension brewed. James Harper was seated at his usual corner table, watching Michael like a predator sizing up prey. Harper had been coming to the restaurant almost daily now, each visit an exercise in calculated antagonism. He wasn't just a difficult customer. He was relentless, exploiting every opportunity to remind Michael of his supposed inferiority. For Michael, it was a delicate balancing act, maintaining his cover while enduring the officer's harassment. But tonight, Harper seemed especially determined to push boundaries. "Mark!" Harper's voice boomed across the dining room, drawing the attention of several nearby patrons. Michael turned, his expression neutral, and approached the table. "Yes, sir?" he asked, keeping his tone measured. Harper leaned back in his chair, swirling a nearly empty glass of whiskey in one hand. "This steak," he said, gesturing to the half-eaten plate in front of him. "Overcooked. Tough. Just like I thought you'd be at this job." Michael inhaled slowly, suppressing the flicker of irritation that threatened to break through. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare another for you?" Harper smirked, clearly pleased with himself. No, I think I'll manage. Just like you, right? Managing to scrape by." Michael's jaw tightened, but he gave a polite nod. "If there's anything else I can do to improve your experience, please let me know." As he turned to leave, Harper's voice stopped him. "Hold up, that's not all. My drink's empty. Again." Michael turned back, forcing a smile. He refilled Harper's glass, careful to keep his hand steady under the officer's scrutinizing gaze. Harper chuckled as Michael placed the glass back on the table. "You're good at this, Mark. Real good. But you know what they say. Stick to what you're good at." The implied insult hung in the air, but Michael didn't bite. Instead, he offered a curt, "Enjoy your evening, sir," and walked away. Behind him, he could feel Harper's eyes boring into his back. Later that evening, as the restaurant began to empty, Harper remained at his table, nursing his whiskey. Michael had hoped the officer would leave early, but Harper seemed intent on lingering. Around midnight, the last few patrons filed out, leaving the staff to begin their closing routines. Michael busied himself polishing silverware, but his focus was divided. Harper was still there, and the man's presence set his nerves on edge. As the minutes dragged on, Harper finally stood and sauntered toward the bar, where Michael was organizing glassware. The room was quiet now, the soft hum of the dishwasher the only sound. Harper leaned against the bar, his smirk as sharp as ever. "You're a patient guy, I'll give you that," Harper said, his tone conversational but laced with malice. "Most people would have snapped by now. Guess you're smarter than you look." Michael didn't respond. He continued his work, placing each glass carefully on the shelf. "But I gotta wonder," Harper continued, his voice dropping slightly. "What's your story? Guys like you don't just end up in places like this. Too polished, too uptight." Michael paused, briefly meeting Harper's gaze. "I'm just here to do my job, sir." Harper laughed, a low, unpleasant sound. "Sure you are. Just a guy trying to make it, huh? But let me tell you something, Mark, or whoever you really are. I've been watching you, and something about you doesn't sit right. I don't know what it is yet, but I'll figure it out." The words hung in the air like a challenge, but Michael didn't rise to it. Instead, he picked up his polishing cloth and moved to another part of the bar, letting Harper's words roll off his back. Inside, however, his mind raced. Harper's suspicions were growing, and the man's persistence was becoming a liability. Michael needed to find a way to neutralize the situation before it escalated further. 2 nights later, Harper returned with a new tactic. This time, his behavior was more aggressive, more public. During the dinner rush, he deliberately spilled his wine, then loudly blamed Michael for clumsiness. "Unbelievable," Harper exclaimed, drawing the attention of nearby diners. "Can't even carry a glass of wine without screwing it up." Michael, forced to clean the mess while enduring the stares of patrons and colleagues, maintained his composure. "I apologize, sir. I'll bring you another glass right away." But Harper wasn't satisfied. "You know, I've seen guys like you before," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Always trying to play the part, always failing. It's almost predictable." The insult stung, but Michael didn't react. He couldn't afford to. Not yet. The other staff whispered about the incident in hushed tones, some expressing quiet sympathy, others sharing wary glances. The tension was palpable, and Michael knew it was only a matter of time before Harper pushed things too far. The break-in point came a week later. During a routine shift, Harper orchestrated his most damaging move yet. While Michael was in the back retrieving an order, Harper slipped a wallet, a thick leather piece filled with cash, into Michael's coat pocket. Moments later, he loudly announced that his wallet had been stolen. The scene was chaos. Harper accused Michael directly, demanding that the staff search him. When the wallet was discovered in Michael's possession, the room fell silent. The other employees stared, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Michael tried to explain, but Harper cut him off. "Save it, Mark," he snapped. "You've been caught, plain and simple." Before Michael could say more, Harper grabbed him roughly by the arm, dragging him toward the entrance. "You're under arrest," Harper declared, twisting Michael's arm behind his back with unnecessary force. The pain was immediate and sharp, but Michael gritted his teeth, refusing to give Harper the satisfaction of hearing him cry out. As Harper marched him out of the restaurant, the weight of the situation sank in. His cover was in jeopardy, his mission at risk. But even as he was shoved into the back of a police car, Michael's resolve remained unbroken. He had come too far to let a man like James Harper derail him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The holding cell was cold and sterile, its concrete walls a dull gray that seemed to sap the color from everything around it. Michael sat on the bench, his arm still throbbing from the force Harper had used during the arrest. The officer's smug grin lingered in Michael's mind, a reminder of the humiliation he'd endured in front of his colleagues and the restaurant's patrons. But as the minutes ticked by, Michael's frustration began to harden into focus. He had been through worse, and he knew how to play the long game. A metallic clang echoed through the corridor as the cell door creaked open. A plainclothes man in his mid-40s stepped inside, his stern face betraying a hint of irritation. It was Agent Samuel Torres, Michael's direct supervisor at the CIA. Michael stood, his cover now useless. "Agent Warren," Torres said, his voice low but firm. "What the hell happened?" Michael explained the events of the evening, recounting Harper's harassment, the planted wallet, and the aggressive arrest. Torres listened intently, his expression darkening with each detail. When Michael finished, Torres sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "This is a mess," Torres muttered. "Your cover's blown, and Harper's put our entire operation at risk." Michael's jaw tightened. "I can still finish the mission. I've been gathering intel on Mendoza for weeks. I'm close to confirming his smuggling routes and partners. We can't pull out now." Torres studied him for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "Fine, but we'll need to tread carefully. Harper's interference could complicate things further." Michael was released within the hour, but not before Harper made one last attempt to assert his authority. As Michael exited the station, Harper stood leaning against a wall, arms crossed, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Looks like you've got friends in high places, Mark," Harper sneered. "But don't think this is over. I'll be watching." Michael didn't respond. He walked past Harper without a word, his focus already shifting back to the mission. He had no intention of letting the officer's vendetta distract him further. Back at the restaurant, Michael returned to his post as if nothing had happened. The staff was cautious around him, their whispers subdued but constant. Some avoided him entirely, while others offered awkward words of support. Michael kept his responses brief, redirecting his energy toward his work. He knew his time at Le Chateau was limited, and every moment counted. Mendoza, oblivious to the drama surrounding Michael, continued his routine visits. The businessman's confidence was a double-edged sword. It made him predictable, but it also meant he was more cautious with his dealings. Michael observed him closely, noting every meeting, every interaction, every hushed conversation behind closed doors. He planted recording devices in strategic locations and documented everything meticulously. It was during one of these meetings that Michael struck gold. Mendoza, seated in his usual private booth, was discussing logistics with a man Michael recognized from his research, Vincent Carver, a known smuggler operating along the eastern seaboard. Their conversation, captured by Michael's hidden microphone, detailed shipment schedules, port locations, and payment routes. It was the breakthrough Michael needed. As Michael reviewed the recording later that night, a plan began to form. He would use the intel to orchestrate a sting operation, but there was one loose end he couldn't ignore: Harper. The next morning, Michael filed an official complaint against Harper through the proper channels, detailing the officer's harassment, excessive use of force, and false accusations. He also included a report of Harper's frequent, suspicious interactions with Mendoza, suggesting a possible connection. The evidence wasn't conclusive, but it was enough to warrant an internal investigation. Harper's reaction was immediate and predictable. He stormed into the restaurant that evening, his face flushed with anger. He confronted Michael in the kitchen, his voice low but seething with rage. "You think you can smear my name and get away with it?" Harper hissed. "I've been on this force for 15 years. I know how to handle guys like you." Michael didn't flinch. "I'm just following protocol, Officer Harper. If there's nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about." Harper's fist clenched, but he restrained himself. Instead, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "This isn't over, Warren. You'll regret this." Michael met Harper's glare, unyielding. "We'll see." The operation against Mendoza went off without a hitch. Armed with the intel Michael had gathered, a joint task force raided the warehouse Mendoza had used as a central hub for his smuggling activities. The evidence was overwhelming: illegal shipments, forged documents, and direct ties to several high-profile criminal networks. Mendoza and his associates were arrested on the spot, their empire dismantled in a single decisive blow. As the dust settled, Michael allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The mission was a success and justice had been served, but there was still one more battle to fight. The internal investigation into Harper's conduct gained traction quickly. Michael's complaint, combined with testimony from restaurant staff and patrons, painted a damning picture of the officer's behavior. Harper's connection to Mendoza was tenuous, but enough to raise questions about his integrity. When investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a series of ethical violations stretching back years. Instances of excessive force, racial profiling, and questionable financial dealings. The trial that followed was a spectacle. Harper's bravado crumbled under the weight of the evidence, and his attempts to justify his actions only made matters worse. Witnesses testified to his abusive behavior, and Michael's calm, detailed account of their interactions left no room for doubt. In the end, Harper was stripped of his badge and sentenced for his misconduct. The courtroom's atmosphere was heavy with a sense of closure as the verdict was read. For Michael, it was a vindication not just of his actions, but of his belief in accountability and justice. As Michael prepared to leave the city, he reflected on the events that had unfolded. The mission had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but it had also reinforced his resolve. Change wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was possible, one victory at a time. He stepped into his car, the city lights fading into the distance as he drove away. The road ahead was long, but Michael was ready for whatever came next. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Check out our other videos and stay tuned for what's next. And if this story resonated with you, share it with your friends. Your support means everything.